Hey everyone, welcome to CAT 2024 VARC Master Series. My name is KD and in this series I am going to take you through various concepts in CAT VARC and I would be there till CAT 2024 to guide you on every single step. But make sure you cooperate equally. What you need to do is you need to tell me in the comment box what are the topics you want me to take up in this series and help you with. जहाँ तक हो सकेगा मैं कोशिश करूँगा that I bring my experiences, my insights in the various question type. Now very clearly that would be helpful only if you participate enthusiastically, right? So this would be a series. We would try to do as many videos as possible. Live classes जहाँ तक हो सकेंगे वो भी करेंगे. And of course you would tell me what are the topics that I need to cover. Now I have been writing CAT for a very long time, so I would try to bring in all the inputs that I have gathered over the years. So let's begin with the basic agenda for this series without delay. What I plan to do is I am going to talk about how to maximize your mock performance because अभी तो mock ही चल रहा है, but of course ultimately this should translate into very good score in the actual paper. Second thing, I would talk about last minute fine tuning, looking at those tiny mistakes, for example how to eliminate two close choices, how to really work on your other areas, for example option elimination, interpretation of ideas better, interpretation of the passage better, and things like that. Of course I would also take up things like poor time management problems or the time trap kind of options. In this video also I would talk about how to not get trapped in time trap questions. Abhi baat karne wala hu, just stay with me for a few more minutes, right? And of course I'll help you with creating an action plan over the next 50 odd days for CAT this year. Now consistency is of course more important than quantity. What I mean by that is I attempt 24 questions in VARC. How is it? I don't know. If you're getting 30-40% questions right, you are attempting 24 questions, then probably you are overdoing it. Itna nahi karna hai baba, thoda kam kar lo. Consistency is more important. There would be up and down of course, but broadly remember consistency is very important. Otherwise on a good day you might end up scoring very well, on bad days you might end up being absolutely heartbroken. तो वो थोड़ा सा maintain करना पड़ेगा. I'll make a video on this consistency also in the coming days. I would also take up issues like attempts over accuracy. For example, I keep on getting doubts saying that my attempts fluctuate a lot, my accuracy fluctuates a lot, my score obviously fluctuates a lot. How do I avoid that? I'll talk about that also. And of course we would also talk about mental endurance, which most of us don't talk about at all. VARC is usually the first section, and unless they change it, very clearly this is where you have to be at your peak. Now remember, if you screw up your VARC, chances are very high that you would not do very well in the next two sections. तो अगर VARC गड़बड़ तो बाकी भी गड़बड़ हो जाता है. तो इससे कैसे बचना है, क्या करना चाहिए, we will talk about that also. So broadly this series would take care of all the major last minute issues. Of course in the comment box you would please write down what you want me to take care of. A little bit of explanation would be helpful, right? So I get a lot of comments saying PJ missing sentence करवा दो. Now करवा दो is not very helpful. For example, in missing sentence, what is it that I do not understand, right? थोड़ा सा आप लिखोगे, I would be able to help you more with those inputs, right? Now moving on, in the next part of the video I would also take up an RC and we would look at how to approach the RC, right? But before that, now you can pause the video here, you can try the question on your own. It's a fairly doable question, सबका favorite Parajumble, right? तो कर सकते हैं आराम से, करके देखो, prepare your answer on a sheet of paper and then I would take it up, right? We would use the usual rules of Parajumble. You guys have done that, I'm pretty sure, a lot. Now a lot of students ask me, I am not good at Parajumble at all, should I leave the section altogether? My answer is no, definitely not, because even within Parajumble, within missing sentence, within odd one out, you have a fair distribution, which means you would see one question is easy, one is moderate, sometimes one is easy, another is difficult. Now the problem is we do not know which one is which. So you have to look at the questions. आप ऐसे नहीं छोड़ सकते. That won't make much sense, right? So let's have a look at it. We find that we are unable to fathom why our lives may have taken a turn for the worse. We find that we are unable to fathom why our lives have taken a turn for the worst. It can open a paragraph. We agonize over the state we are in and find it easier to wallow in self-pity rather than make the effort to look deeper. Now here the author says, we are pained, we keep on crying over the state we are in. Which state? So this state is not clear here, which probably is given here. Why our lives may have taken a turn for the worse. So probably this is the state it is talking about. Probably. At some stage in our lives, we are confronted with questions that seem to have no answer. And A said we find that we are unable to understand why our lives may have taken a turn for the worse. And B talked about the state. So the state was not very clear, but CA probably. Because it says at some stage in our lives, and here it says we find that we are unable to fathom why our lives. So at some stage, our lives. Some stage in our lives, makes some sense. We find this, thankfully we have a pronoun here. We find this difficult to cope up with. Now what is this? It is something that is very hard to cope up with. Cope up with means you are unable to manage it, unable to kind of control it, fight with it, right? Now, if you look at it, this is a typical question where in the first 60 seconds, listen to me very, very carefully. In the first 60 seconds, you would start feeling that the combinations I can make can be many. For example, we fairly understand that probably C would start it. At some stage in our lives, we are confronted with questions that seem to have no answer. Okay? And this says we find that we are unable to fathom why our lives may have taken a turn for the worse. CA goes together, there is no problem. Then you start thinking, should I write CADB? Because we find this difficult to cope with. That is unable to fathom. This is a difficulty. Or is it CABD? That is at some stage fathom why our lives. Then we agonize over the state we are in. The state means we are not able to understand what is happening in our lives. And we find it easier to wallow in self-pity means blame ourselves, be a victim, rather than make the effort to look deeper. And this, we find this difficult to cope with. This here means we agonize over the state, but we don't make efforts to look deeper. We find this difficult to cope with. This becomes a problem. Now what happens in actual test, I'll tell you from experience, is you start thinking and rereading the options again and again. CADB, हाँ यार ये भी सही लग रहा है. CABD ये भी ठीक लग रहा है. So let me think for 30 more seconds. CADB. Okay, but then it can start with A also, no? Why not A? Should I write it? We find that we are unable to fathom why our lives may have taken a turn for the worse. And नहीं यार A से तो नहीं, but CADB, CABD. And now suddenly you realize it's 2.5 minutes. It's 3 minutes. What do? In such a case, you simply follow the basic rules of Parajumble that we have a very good opening. And it says we find this difficult to cope with. Cope with means we are unable to manage it. So what is it that we are unable to manage? A situation, right? Now, option B very clearly talks about a situation. We agonize, we are pained over the state. Which state? We are unable to fathom. That's the state. We are in and find it easier to be a victim than make the effort. This state is very difficult to cope up with. So you probably mark this, which is the correct answer by the way, and you move on. But you might keep on thinking that this could have also been a possible case. So what do you do in this case? If you're able to see the connections properly, no problem. If you're not, my suggestion is you simply take a call, mark the answer because it's a theta question, and move on. You have to have an internal sense of the first minute going into finding connections and second minute going into taking the final decision. If you keep on spending more time, you would waste more time, but you would not have a clear-cut answer, because this is the problem with a lot of Parajumble questions. And this was not even a hard one. So I'll show you another question where You try it first and then we talk about it. Now again pause your video, try to solve this question and then we talk about it. Now this question broadly looks quite okay. This allows them to learn valuable information about how human brains parse time. Parse means categorize. These third-person descriptions do not suffice to explain the first-person experience of duration. When neuroscientists research time perception, they apply clock time to neural correlates, behavioral indications, and verbal reports of lived time. I think it's very obvious that C starts the paragraph. It has the neuroscientists researching time perception. Always pay attention to the main idea of the passage, even if it's a Parajumble question. Neuroscientists studying time perception is the main idea. A says this allows them. Them has to be neuroscientists. So after C, we can write A to categorize time. And then it says, but these third-person descriptions do not suffice to explain the first-person experience of duration. Makes sense? Now, the last one. There remains an unexplained gap between brains and consciousness. Now, under time pressure, what will happen is, you would keep on thinking, should I make it DCAB or should I make it CB, CAB, D? That is a very high possibility. So let's read DCAB. There remains an unexplained gap between brains and consciousness. But CAB does not talk about brains and consciousness. It talks about time perception. You can see it's about categorizing time, it is about experience of duration, it is about time perception. It is not about gap between brains and consciousness. This is a very, very unrelated statement. If I start with D, then it becomes the introductory statement of the paragraph, and the paragraph should be about brains and consciousness gap. But that's not the case. So what do? I go for CA, B, D. Now, does it sound very weird at the end? Yes, but the problem is these small paragraphs are taken from larger articles. This one is related to something that probably came before. Or the next paragraph would talk about this line. You may have read such paragraphs also, where the last line is continued in the next paragraph. I don't know, but we can't start with D for sure. And therefore, the only possible answer is CABD. Now imagine under time pressure doing this question. Chances are extremely high that you would start with D and mark CAB after that. Any other combination I do not see. I hope you would not make any other combination. But getting this question right under time pressure बहुत मुश्किल है. Theory की बात अलग है. Global ज्ञान is okay, but under time pressure this question will go wrong for sure. Mostly. Correct. Now what is the point I'm making? The point I'm making is have this internal time machine, right? In the first 60 seconds you try to create the paragraph. If you don't have enough connections, you take a call and then you move on. What should you not do? Throw good time after bad. 2 minutes हो गए तो 3 मिनट, 3 मिनट हो गए तो 4 मिनट, 4 मिनट हो गए तो 5 मिनट. Don't do that. You have to exchange time for marks. That is the whole game. If you can't do that, you would suffer for sure. Correct? So that's the message I'm passing on here. I hope you understood. All Parajumble questions obviously would not be like this, but I just gave you 2 examples where one was still doable, the second one can be a total bouncer, and you have to be extremely careful with Parajumble questions. Usually when we see abstract passages, generally we feel we are not going to understand this. ये तो नहीं होने वाला, बहुत मुश्किल है, right? And you have prepared, of course, so you know these abstract passages. You have done them in your mocks, your sectional tests and all. But usually, if you are able to get the claim of the author right, main idea right, broadly these questions are quite doable. I have made videos on abstract passages also. You can watch them as well. तो ये quite doable होता है, हो जाता है. आपको patiently बस कोशिश करनी है, try करते रहना है, doing 4 RCs per day on a consistent basis. Next 50 days, even that means 200 extra RCs, right? थोड़ी मेहनत consistently is all you need. And in these passages, we would focus on the claim of the author. Detail is not what I'm going to focus on. And second, We will not try to retain anything. Retain नहीं करना है, बस हमें ध्यान से author का claim पकड़ना है. Now you can pause the video, you can read the passage. Just make sure that you have read it at a decent pace. Usually a 500 word RC should take you about 3.5 minutes to read. तो अगर 4 मिनट भी लग रहा है पढ़ने में, that's totally fine. You can spend that time. Our accuracy range should be 70-75%. So 4 questions, 3 out of 4 is what we are going to target. एक गलत हो जाता है, we don't care, it's okay. I mean, सब कुछ थोड़ी ना सही करना है ना. So let's begin. Michel Foucault's two most referenced work are the central sources. Now remember, the way I read these passages is I generally read the names as X and Y. Michel Foucault's two most recent referenced work, X and Y, are the central source, or sometimes I do also. So X and Y are the central source for his analysis of power. Interestingly enough, however, Foucault was not always known for his signature word. Okay, here super important, always pay attention to statements like, interestingly, however, Foucault was not always known for his signature word. So anticipation, you can ask, so when did he become famous? When did he say that for the first time? Probably this would come. Foucault did not attempt to construct a philosophical fortress around his signature concept. This is the claim again. Foucault did not try to create a philosophical fortress. Means Foucault did not defend his concept of power too much. He was not in, obsessed with it or totally in love with it. He did not try to defend it. कोई छुएगा नहीं, इसको दूर रहना है. He didn't do that. He had witnessed firsthand how the arguments of the linguistic turned philosophers grew brittle once they were deployed to analyze more and more by way of words. So he had seen what happens to linguistic turned philosophers and their arguments. So he was not very fixed or rigid about his own philosophy, right? So Foucault himself expressly refused to develop an overarching theory of power. Overarching means a theory that covers everything. So very important, Foucault did not develop a theory of power that tried to cover everything. सब कुछ cover करने वाला कोई cover theory Foucault ने नहीं बनाई. Interviewers would sometimes press him to give them a unified theory, but counter argument, contradictory statement, ध्यान से पढ़ना है. But he always demurred, he always refused. So what do we see? Foucault did not give a unified theory of power. उन्होंने नहीं दिया ऐसा. He was not very rigid about it and things like that. Such a theory, he said, was simply not the goal of his work. So unified theory of power was not the goal of his work. Foucault remains best known for his analysis of power, not theory of power. Indeed, his name is almost synonymous with the word power. Yet, he did not himself offer a philosophy of power. We just saw that, right? Very interesting. Foucault's name is associated with the word power, but he did not give a philosophy of power and he did not want to have a very rigid view of power, right? Broadly, यही बात बोलिए. Herein lies the richness and the challenge of Foucault's work. Claim statement. Author will explain this. Herein lies the richness and challenge of Foucault's work. So what are the good things? Richness is good things. And what are the challenges? His is a philosophical approach to power characterized by innovative, painstaking, sometimes frustrating, and often dazzling attempts to politicize power itself. Rather than using philosophy to freeze power into timeless essence, and then use that essence to comprehend so much of power's manifestation, Foucault sought to unburden philosophy of its icy gaze of capturing essence. Now, as always, abstract passage, they keep on repeating the same idea. The author earlier itself said that Foucault did not make his philosophical fortress. He did not make his philosophy frigid. He did not make his philosophy rigid. He did not make his philosophy inflexible. पहले बोल दिया, अब उसी को repeat कर रहे हैं. They have to write 500 words. He wanted to free philosophy to track the movements of power. To appreciate the originality of Foucault's approach, it's helpful to contrast it to that of previous political philosophy. It is helpful to contrast it that of previous political philosophy. Before Foucault, political philosophers had presumed that power had an essence. Thomas Hobbes thought that at its best, purest power would be exercised from the singular position of sovereignty. So there would be one Raja, one president. He would exercise power. Before, Foucault, people thought that, right? So one prime minister would have all the power, or the president, or the Raja, or the Mantri. They'll have all the power before Foucault. But Foucault said something else. So Hobbes called it Leviathan, right? But Foucault had different ideas. Foucault never denied the reality of state power in the Hobbesian sense, but his political philosophy emanates from his doubt about the assumption that the only real power is sovereign power. As we anticipated, Foucault said, listen, power does not come only from the president or the king or the parliament or the Raja Mantri. There is no one source of power. Foucault accepted that there were real forces of violence in the world, and not only state violence. There is also corporate violence due to enormous condensation of capital, gender violence in the form of patriarchy, and the violence, both overt and subtle, of white supremacy, real estate redlining, and now mass incarceration. Foucault's work affirmed that such exercises of force were exhibits of sovereign power, likeness of Leviathan. So what is the author saying? Author says Foucault said that yes, there can be different expressions of power. Correct? For example, patriarchy or capitalism or gender violence and things like that. But Foucault believed that there is just no one source of power, like the state government or the central government. In fact, he also accepted that the violence can come from many sources, like patriarchy, capitalism and all. It is not necessary that violence comes only from state or only from sovereign or only from the president or the prime minister. What he doubted was the assumption that we could extrapolate from this easy observation the more complex thought that power only ever appears in Leviathan-like form. Again, the same point. So Foucault said, boss, power does not flow from Leviathan-like form only. In seeing through the imaginary singularity of power, Foucault was able to also see it set against itself. He was able to hypothesize and therefore to study the possibility that power does not always assume just one form, and that in virtue of this, a given form of power can coexist alongside or even come into conflict with other forms of power. Same point, Baba. He's saying the same thing, that there can be multiple sources of power. There is just no one source of power, like Hobbes said. Such coexistences and conflicts, of course, are not mere speculative conundrums, but are the sort of stuff that one would need to empirically analyze in order to understand. So, last line is just saying that we need to study such things. So, what is the main idea of the author? Main idea is very simple. Foucault studied power. He did not have a philosophy of power. He said power does not come from only one source. Like Hobbes said, there can be multiple sources of power. Violence can also come from multiple sources. And we should not believe that power comes from only one source. That's it. यही तो बोला है, और क्या बोला? Now let's look at the questions. This is the point I keep on saying, making in every video I make. Try to simplify what you read. Try to cut through the details given in the passage. Just try to see what is the 1, 2, 3 basic ideas in an abstract passage. अगर आप इतना भी पकड़ लेते हो, तो more or less आप बहुत अच्छा करके आओगे. Right, now let's look at the questions. Again, pause the video, try to answer the question one by one. Now, if you have read the passage properly with me, question बहुत ही आसान है. Which of the following is true according to the passage? Now, option 1 says, Foucault's main works are central to philosophical understanding of the Hobbesian world. Hobbes has been mentioned as somebody who talked about power before Foucault. Foucault's work is important for Hobbesian world. Passage ने कहीं ऐसा नहीं बोला, out. Foucault attempted to construct a comprehensive philosophical theory of power. It's clearly mentioned that he never tried doing that. We have seen that, right? So if you read these lines here or lines here, you would see that he never wanted to have a very comprehensive theory of power. So this is clearly out. Foucault doubted the belief that the only real power is sovereign power. Absolutely, that's what the entire passage saying. Main claim ही यही है कि Foucault said, boss, there is no one source of power. Power can follow from many sources. So this is true. Foucault's philosophy of power freezes power into a timeless essence. Exact ulta is given in the passage here, right? So this is also out, and therefore the correct answer has to be option C. So it's a fairly doable question. Why it's fairly doable? Because you understood the passage well. तो आराम से questions हो जाते हैं. Moving on. All of the following can be inferred from the passage except. Inferred means based on the passage which one is correct. तो हमें 3 ऑप्शन ढूंढने जो करेक्ट है, एक जो करेक्ट नहीं है. So I have to find which one is not. Foucault refrained from building a philosophical stronghold around his signature concept. Almost given directly, right? So in this area, so this is true. Foucault's work confirmed that use of enforcement was manifestation of sovereign power. Use of enforcement was manifestation. Foucault's work confirmed. In fact, he said that power does not flow from sovereign only. So this is an irrelevant choice. Foucault's approach politicized power through innovative and meticulous efforts. Yes. In fact, the passage talks about it towards the end also, that he studied power, for example, from the angle of violence also. So he used many innovative and meticulous ways. So this is also true. Foucault did not offer a philosophy of power. That's clearly mentioned here. So very clearly, this is also true. And the only possible choice for except would be option B. So you can clearly see, once you understand the main ideas of the passage, doing questions can become very easy. Of course, we will also talk about elimination and things like that in the coming videos, but broadly understanding the key ideas, key claims is all it takes. Mostly हो जाता है एक बार आप वो समझ गए तो. Which of the following arguments is not discussed in the passage? Repetitive questions, right? Main ideas based questions हैं. The historical development of Foucault's philosophical concepts. Where did we discuss historical development? History की तो बात की ही नहीं है. We straight away come to the point that Foucault talked about power. He was famous for it, but he did not have a theory of power. Historical development, and that too philosophical concepts. Option A does not even talk about power. Philosophical concept की बात करता है. Foucault's critique of the linguistic turn philosophers. Yes, it's given. The author says that Foucault knew about the brittle, how the philosophy is become brittle once these things are done. So very clearly author talks about it. Foucault's analysis of the different forms of power and their manifestation. This one of course is one of the central ideas of the passage. Foucault's comparison of his approach to power with that of previous political philosophers. Hobbes is mentioned. This is also true. The only possible answer is option A. Which combination of keywords, very often asked CAT question type, encapsulates, grabs the essence, the main themes discussed in the passage? So Foucault, definitely. In these questions, always compare. Power, yes. Power, power, power. Power, yes. Power, power, power. Power, power. Philosophy, yes. Resistance, no. Historical development, not at all. So correct answer is A. Laddu question. So what did we do in this video? So I talked about what is it that is going to be the key areas of improvement, how we would take up in coming videos, the key areas and the approaches that are going to be helpful, of course, and we would take up different kind of questions, different level of questions. And the first and most important point would be that you guys let me know what are the key areas you are facing problems in. Though I understand that missing link or odd one out or parajumble, parasummary, वो तो होंगे, but some key areas, for example, how to eliminate choices, how to understand passage better, how to break down complex passages, abstract passages कैसे करते हैं, economic passages कैसे करते हैं, whatever areas you are facing trouble in, let me know, including strategy also. Do comment and consider liking it if you found it useful. Thank you so much for watching this.